Have I told y'all this? My name is Nelda Spell Mitchell, and this is just a collection of stories of things that happen in our lives. This is a picture of our youngest child, Don, when he was about 4 or 5 years old. The story's about when he was 3, but this is the picture we had of him playing army with his beagle dog. And the story I'm going to read you is that dog won't bite, but it bit Don. And I'm going to read that to you. Oh, he won't bite. He's just ugly. That's what Dennis said every time I fussed about that, how mean looking old Ranger was. He just looked mean. Ranger was his name, the dog. Well, before Ranger, for the first 25 years of our marriage life, we had cows. They were not very profitable to us, but we had one butchered each year for our home freezer to use, so we had plenty to eat. And the bank would loan us money if we had some cows. There were beef cows. When Don was approaching 3 years old, Dennis decided that he needed a real cow dog. I do not remember who convinced him that no free dog would ever chase a cow. Would never chase a cow. There were plenty of free dogs. We had a dog pen full of beagles and blue tick hounds and red bone hounds, but they were for deer hunting. The favorites of these dogs ran loose in the yard, and Dennis said if he used these dogs to chase the cows, they wouldn't work with the cows. They would start chasing rabbits and squirrels, and then it would ruin them for hunting as deer, and they would not be good with the cows. So he wanted a real cow dog. Well, the bank had its hand on every bit of the money we got from the sale of cotton and the sale of cows. They got their share first. If there was any left, it was ours. The only undesignated money we had was 1/2 of what we got from the sale of 1 acre of cucumbers each June. Dennis traded with Marshall and Meadowloo Crosby to give them half the cucumber money if they and their children would hoe the weeds and pick the cucumbers. He would furnish the rest. Dennis tried to make lots of cucumbers. He even rigged up a small pump in the pond and ran a water hose to put water down between the middles of the rows of cucumbers to water them. The most we could hope for was $500 for our half. I do not remember even getting $500. I was extremely opposed to using any of the money that we got to buy a dog, and especially since so many free ones were frequently dropped out. Surely one of those would do for cows. Well, Dennis was determined, and as soon as he saved $100, Dale, Beverly, Donnie, and I went with him to buy a real cow dog from a man south of Hattiesburg. I had to admit that it really was a beautiful dog. Its reddish brown, slightly curled hair and friendly nature made a favorable impression on each of us. The children rubbed and squeezed and hugged it all the way home. As soon as the car stopped and a door opened, out it sailed and ran right to the middle of the road, just in time to get run over by a speeding neighbor that probably thought he had just hit another bump in the road. Oh well, there with that $100. Then someone convinced Dennis that a $300 Catahoula cur dog from Louisiana would solve all his problems with his cows when he moved them from pasture to a pasture. He could just tell that dog which cow to chase, and that breed of dog had a reputation for understanding English better than any hired person, and it would be more economical. Well, since this particular breed of dog was developed in Louisiana, Dennis found one in the Woneeds around Baton Rouge and went by himself to buy it. When he brought it home, oh goodness, disappointment. That was a kind word to describe our children's and my feelings at the first sight of old Ranger. Only his mother could love him. Catahoula dogs can be one of many colors and color patterns. The pattern for Ranger was thrown away soon after his birth. He was a black merle with glass eyes. His head was shaped like a bulldog and his mouth was split from ear to ear. He was a big puppy, but all his puppy cuteness had disappeared. Age did not improve his looks or his demeanor. In fact, the older he got, the meaner he was. He did not even try to bite any of us, but he snapped at the other dogs if they got too close to his food. Then there was a morning in June, just after Don had turned 4 in April. As usual, when Don left the house to play, his arms were full of little toy tractors. Just as he got down the doorsteps, his screams and Ranger's growls got my attention. Oh, thank the Lord I was nearby on the porch. Ranger's teeth were sunk in on each side of Don's eyes. Don's entire face was inside Ranger's mouth, and Ranger was shaking Don from side to side. Scream I did, and I looked for something, anything to beat the dog off. We each had several pairs of shoes in a pile near the back door, and I grabbed up an armful and sailed down the steps. I did not know if it was my screams or hitting him with the shoes or with my fists that prompted Ranger to turn loose, but he did. Blood was streaming down each side of Don's face. Oh, I was so afraid that he would die right then. I yelled for Dale and Beverly to get in the car. As soon as I wiped off most of the blood, I threw Don in the car and drove the quarter of a mile to where Marshall, Maddie Lou, and their children were picking up cucumbers. They had heard me screaming and ran to the car to see what had happened. By then, I had decided that Don was not going to bleed to death, but I knew that the dog bites were bad. I told them to get the cucumbers they had picked, and I would carry them to the pickling plant in town as I went to the doctor. Needless to say, I went to the doctor first. I stopped at old Dr. Allred's, for I knew that he did not have many patients, and I could just walk in with no appointment. He cleaned the punctures and cuts Ranger's teeth had made. Some should have had stitches, but Dr. Allred closed them tight with Band-Aids. He gave Don a tetanus shot and a penicillin shot. Then, looking straight at me, he said for us to shut up the dog for 3 weeks. If the dog had rabies, he would become very sick in those 21 days. If the dog did have rabies, we would need to make arrangements for Don to have the very painful shots that would prevent him from having rabies. And I knew that rabies was usually fatal in humans if not treated. Well, wouldn't you know? The second thing Dennis said when we got home was, "I blew his brains out and killed that dog," when Marshall told me what had happened. Well, first he had asked if Don was going to live. He was as scared as I was. But neither of us knew yet what fear was. Oh my. The doctor said to shut Ranger up for 3 weeks to see if he had rabies. Oh, Dennis went to see if he could find any of Ranger's brains to test for rabies, but he had literally blown his brains out. So we just prayed that Ranger was not mad with rabies, but was just mad at Don, or maybe he just wanted a toy tractor to gnaw on. A week later, fear really kicked in. Dennis found one of the beagles in the pen dead. And it had not even been sick. He carried the dead dog to Jackson, where animals can be tested for rabies. The test would take a week. So there we were. Do we start giving Don the shots to keep him from having rabies, or wait and pray that the beagle did not have rabies? None of the other dogs got sick, so we waited and prayed. Finally, the report said that the beagle did not have rabies. Oh, thank you, dear Lord. So remember, dogs do bite.